I know you weren't sure whether you want to publish your story in the book. So can you tell us more about that?
About the why I didn't?
No, why you did at the end.
Oh, okay. I was like, we're going to start with a negative.
Sure.
So as I said, I was really excited that you had found me. And my reservation was that I have been involved in a couple of other projects that I really didn't think were worthy of the story they were telling. But you came through. I mean, this is a beautiful book, and it's a wonderful compilation of stories. And I'm really happy to be a part of it. I know I have been a pain in your ass here and there. Am I allowed to swear? I should ask before we start.
Of course, you can do whatever you want, share whatever you want. And the more you do, the better. I love that. I love your honesty. I feel like your story just stood out so much because you are so honest about every single details of your life.
Yeah, as I said, much to my children's chagrin.
Yes. So what's changed since then? This was
So it's funny you should ask that, because I've just recorded, reading the chapter aloud and listening. I'm now listening to it a lot. And the only thing, I'm proud of what I did. I'm proud of the piece I wrote. The only thing that bothers me is you ask what's changed. I've gone from, I said, I still have my symptoms, but they're less, and I'm encouraged that they're going to continue to less. Somewhere in like the last 3 or 4 months, an epiphany has hit me that I'm not managing, I'm healing. And I now have this new mantra, which is, if an earthworm can grow a new head, why the fuck can't I fix this? I mean, it's really, like a worm is just a tiny little thing with not many brain cells and stuff, and they can grow a new head or a new tail. Like, we have it within our bodies to heal things. And there are so many external things that block that ability to do that. And somehow or another, I've tapped into that. And now my kids say I'm a total full-blown hippie, but it's working for me.
I guess I'm a hippie too, because it's so funny you mentioned that. Actually, I wanted to ask you these questions last. Do you believe in healing? And you just started off this conversation with like,
no, and that's what it is. So I am working on putting out more information about my use of cannabis and things. What I have figured out is there are 2 levels to using, well, it's probably multiple levels, but the 2 levels that I'm familiar with as far as cannabis and CBD and all plant-based medicine is twofold to me. You can use it to manage your symptoms in replacement of all the pharmaceuticals and whatnot. And it is a phenomenal vehicle to use for that, without all of the, the side effects. So you can use it for appetite, you can use it for sleep, you can use it for anxiety. There are so many different things, but you could also double down and use it to heal. But that's a whole different level. And I don't know, there are many people out there who have healed cancer and other really, really horrible medical conditions using plant-based medicine. And there are also people who use cannabis all the time, but still have their conditions. And again, it's that mental set of how you're viewing it, and how, when you're consuming it, what you're expecting from it, what you're looking to get from it. And mine had always been to just manage until recently. And all of a sudden, as I said, I had this epiphany, and I was like, wait a minute, like, I'm healing shit. And I don't, now I'm confronted with, what if I really do heal this? Like, and I don't have MS, like, my disabled placard is going to go away. My husband's going to be so disappointed. Like,
why was he disappointed?
Well, because he loves using the disabled placard. We get, front of the line, and it's the one perk he gets from being married to me.
Well, I don't think they can remove your disability thing just because you feel like you healed.
And if I go in and actually get an MRI and show no disease detected, that's what I'm dreaming of. I don't know if it's possible, but in my mind,
I believe it is.
Yeah. And so if I do that and all of a sudden I don't, so here's the thing. I am loath to go to a neurologist given my past experience. And what I have come to understand is I have severe PTSD, and it's legitimate. I went through some really, really shitty things, and I'm scared of doctors, all doctors, but particularly neurologists that are going to tell me what to do. So I am trying to find a neurologist that supports me and my path and what I want to do. And once I do that, I would like to have an MRI to see, have I improved any of the lesions? Because I had them all up and down my spine. And I never really, when they show you the scan and they're like, this is, your brain on MS, I never saw what they were talking about. It's just like, I never really saw the baby in the ultrasound picture. Like I say, oh yeah, but I don't really see it. And I'd like somebody to take it and show me exactly where the lesions are, what they look like. So I believe in visualization. And I want to be able, when I'm going deep into my meditation and my yoga, I want to be able to think about those motherfuckers, as I call them, and eliminate them from my life. But if I do that, that changes everything for me. It's just like somebody with stage 4 cancer who manages to cure it and is clear of all disease. It's that embodied who you were. I mean, who I am is defined by this disease. I didn't want it to be, but it kind of became that way by becoming an author and a blogger. I've talked about this. As you said, I'm very open and candid about things. And I have found that that's extremely useful to other people. I'm very good at putting things into words. And so people feel an affinity to me and my words. They're drawn to it. But I also am blatantly honest. And here's why. I joked that my kids are horrified that I mentioned that I shit my pants when I had small intestinal bowel obstruction. And the reason is I'm embarrassed. But if I own that embarrassment, then I control the narrative around it. I get to make fun of it rather than fearing somebody else make fun of me. And that for me reduced my stress level over, the shit that might happen immensely. The minute I owned it, nobody else could make fun of me because it's my joke now. And that's how I did it. But so if I end up without MS, it's just a really weird place for me to look at being, because having MS has been my life for 18 years.
It's so interesting because I'm constantly changing. I'm evolving. I feel like with MS, I am reading different books that I used to read before, and I'm learning about myself, most importantly. And I listened to this podcast by Emily Fletcher, and the speaker said that throughout life, you have to die in order to really live. I know this sounds like a little bit out there, but what if you heal your MS and you don't have MS anymore, and that means you died kind of, and you start over, and it's a new life, a new beginning.
Yeah, you have to say goodbye to that version of yourself.
Yes.
It's just like when you were married and you go through a divorce. Even if it was the shittiest of marriages, you are still leaving behind an identity that was yours. I mean, for me, it was for 15 years. I mean, so I've been through this process before of shedding something, and it's wonderful when it's something you don't want. But as I said, it's just, and this only really popped in my head in the last few months, that really the sense of I can heal this. And it's just redefining where I see my role. I mean, because before it was helping people manage, and now I'm like, well, shit, I can help people heal. I mean, I don't think, to be honest, it's going to be the whole public, basis that's going to go down this route, because it takes a lot of work. But
People
for those
have to be ready to heal.
Yeah. I mean, and I can tell the minute I say just a few words to somebody about, my hippy dippiness, I can tell whether or not they buy in. And that's absolutely fine, because if they don't, that's their road and that's their path. And even if I can help them with just, again, the cannabis, managing the symptoms is a huge step, because what I've learned is the pharmaceuticals are very damaging. And I'm an extreme case, certainly. I went into anaphylactic shock when I took, one of the DMDs, and I had horrible, my body was screaming at me, please don't do this. And I was just like, I'm going to do this because the doctors told me it was what to do. And that was another thing. I mean, you talk about, dying and saying goodbye to versions. It's also letting go of beliefs. I mean, letting go of the absolute belief system that if I'm sick, I go to a doctor, was difficult for me, because that's what I was raised to believe. And even though I was very hesitant, I tried to do natural childbirths, but unfortunately it was like 47 hours and I finally tapped out. But I mean, I tried because I really didn't, love the idea of having medicine in me. But when I got this disease, it changed everything, because everyone indicated that the pharma was the way to go.
Yes. When was the last time you got an MRI? You got an MRI?
2015.
Okay.
And so crazy. I mean, one of the things, as I said, I now have a distrust of the medical system. I'm not saying I hate doctors. They're human beings. I'm sure many of them are very nice, but they're not trained in the right paths for what I am looking for. Even my naturopath isn't really sure what to do with me. I mean, the last time I was there, I always have my husband come in with me, partly so that he remembers the things I don't remember, and we can discuss it. And when we walked out, he looked at me, he goes, I think you're impressing the fuck out of Dr. Ed, because he was like, now, what do you do? And he's writing it all down, because I'm like, oh, I take a shit ton of weed. And he's like, what exactly is a shit ton? Like, he's trying to take notes on it. And that's awesome. But again, it's just reflective of even those that are in the training that I want don't know a lot about cannabis and CBD and other plants. But so I want to find a neurologist. And one of the things that is mind-boggling and really annoying to me is my healthcare is being managed by my insurance company. I was told I can't see a neurologist because in the eyes of my insurance company, it's been so long since I went to one, I have to be re-diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. So I have to go through the process of being diagnosed again, even though I have all my medical records from the University of Washington and all my doctors and all my MRIs that show significant lesions and significant progression. They don't care. Even though the world says there's no cure for this disease, they still say that I have to go through the whole protocol of being diagnosed again. And for me, that's offensive. It's like I was lying all this time. And so now
I put you through the emotional trauma so you can experience the same thing.
It's like, why? And this is all for the insurance company. There's no, I mean, another example, I talk in the book that I was anemic, and it's something that I try to manage naturally, but there's only so much beef one individual can eat. And, my levels have slipped and I'm back down to 11% saturation, which is not good. And I said to the doctor, okay, let's go back in and do more infusions. I'd like to get to a point where I don't have to do that, but it's been 2 years and I've dropped. And he said, unfortunately, I can't do that until you're 9% because insurance won't pay it for it until you're 9%. So I've spent the last 3 weeks trying to drop my level, that 2%, by eating even less beef, which is insane, so that I can go, because I'm obviously, I've been slipping. I'm obviously not going to be able to manage this naturally. And, so it's inevitable, but I would like to get the infusion before the summer because getting that iron in me gives me a whole lot of energy. But again, I've had to play this game, and that is so upsetting to me that I am, there are these business suit people in offices somewhere working for an insurance company, raking in money, deciding on my health, because no one should be able to do that but me. And that's part of the thing that annoys me now with the system.
Yes, there are so many annoying things. It's like the list is endless. And
it is.
More you talk to people about this, I feel like everybody finds something with it, nobody's happy with the whole thing.
Yeah. It's not a good place to live. But again, if you take control and you do it yourself and you believe in yourself, and that's a really hard thing. I mean, I didn't know whether this is going to work. I mean, 7 years ago, it was a crapshoot, but I had nowhere else to turn. And I had no one supporting me. I mean, my doctor didn't want to talk about it. After I learned and became better, I went back to them because I have an educational program. And I had talked, when I had written my book, I had gone in and done, a talk with patients and stuff. But that was all about the pharma. And they were all about me coming in, and then they wanted to do more of those. But once I came off the pharma and I wanted to talk about naturally, it was just crickets. No one wanted to talk to me.
Can you give us like a quick, short...
No.
Can you give us a longer version of cannabis and what you do and how much you started using and all those, just a little bit, not to confuse any listeners here.
Yeah, so I say that I consume copious amounts, and I need to clarify that is because I have an enzyme deficiency. And so my consumption looks very different from everybody else in that I don't get stoned. I mean, I can eat 1,000 milligram edible, which would have anybody else in the hospital completely knocked out. And I know this because I've sent some of my family members to the hospital by eating some, not intentionally, accidentally, but it's a very, very strong dosage. It doesn't get me stoned, but it makes me better. And it makes me focus on myself and my innards and healing stuff. But when I started, I didn't know that. And so really what I did was I was smoking cigarettes. So I didn't have, a lot of people have an aversion to, smoking as a consumption level. I didn't. And so I started with a vape pen because it seemed like the thing that smelled the least. I mean, that's the other thing. I hated the smell of weed when I started this. I mean, it repulsed me. And it was because of all of the negative association to it. My older brother had smoked it. My parents were very, against it. And so it was just, smells elicit memories and thoughts. And for me, weed was a negative thing. And so I had to get over that to begin with, like smelling like it and smelling it around me. And it was interesting because the minute it started to help me, I fell in love with the smell. And now, I mean, I've got my nose in jars all the time, but it took me, I mean, I had all the reservations that I think most people listening to, my podcast or listening to this would have. I was not let's go weed. I was scared shitless. And it took me months to even walk into the store to ask for anything. So I started with some tinctures that you could put underneath your tongue. And then I went to the vape pen. And the vape pen, now knowing how much I need to actually feel the results, it's amazing to me that my brain and body told me to continue, because I was just doing like one tiny little puff.
How long did it take you to figure out your dose?
Again, it was a long time because I needed so much. I did exactly what I would tell somebody else to do, which is I bought a strain that had a mixture of THC and CBD. And I took a puff and then I just sat with it. But again, I don't get high. So I was sitting with really nothing that I was aware of, but I never did any big jumps. I always, it was then just a few more puffs. And then I felt like that wasn't strong enough. And so I switched over to flower and smoking, whether it was a pipe or a joint. And then that wasn't enough. So I went to a bong, and then that wasn't enough. So I went to what's called dabbing, which is concentrates, which is a really, really highly concentrated form. But all of this is smoking. And again, I had been smoking cigarettes and I knew that I had harmed my lungs, but it was edibles is something that people are a little fearful of because A, it takes 20 to 60 minutes to feel the results, and B, it can hit you a lot harder. Like a small dose can hit you. And so people have, big reservations about that. And I did too. Now I wish I had delved into the world of edibles faster. But again, I think it was a learning process, and I'm convinced that this whole thing was so that I am well aware of all of the different methods, so that if I'm trying to help somebody else, I'm not just saying, oh, well, I think you can, use a dab, and not having ever done it. It's like, and now I haven't smoked. I tried smoking a joint somebody gave me from a strain that they had developed and wanted me to try it. And it was in joint form. So I smoked it, and my lungs weren't upset or anything, but I didn't enjoy it at all. I mean, it's kind of like I've evolved, and now, I don't even really use my edibles anymore because I just use this ground up. So I take the weed and I put it in the oven, because that's how you activate the THC and the CBD if you're using hemp. And I put it in the oven for 40 minutes, and that activates it. And then I grind it up into this powder. And when I make my smoothie in the morning, I just put a tablespoon of that into my smoothie. And that these days is getting me through the entire day. That is all I do. And I am out running around doing things. And it amazes me, because I used to have to be tied to my bong or something every hour or two to medicate. And I think my levels of inflammation have come down significantly. So I'm not relying on it to mask so many things. And I explain to people, when I consume it, I don't get high, outside that any visually people can see. But what it does is it just takes my mind and puts it inside. It makes me immediately think, okay, what's wrong today? Like, what is hurting you? And I have to, like, if I consume my smoothie and I don't sit down and do my meditation and yoga, outwardly I look fine, but inside I'm dying, because I want to sit down and do what I call go find the pain. Like, I'm living relatively pain-free these days, which is absolutely mind-blowing considering where I was 6 years ago. And I have to now go and find the pain. When I go do the yoga, it's excruciating. And as I said to my husband, having lived in pain for so long and now not having it, it's very hard to convince myself to go in there and find the pain. But I know that's what's continuing me forward. And so when I consume the cannabis, something in my brain clicks that this is now the time to focus on myself. And so what I am now kind of instructing people, I have so many people say, I don't want to get stoned. I don't want to get stoned. And first, oftentimes when we're given a prescription, we get affected, stoned. I mean, when I was on methadone, I was high off my ass for like a month and a half. And I did not drive my kids anywhere. I had somebody else drive them to school because I was not functioning. After about a month and a half, we got my dosage correct and I could function. And at no point in time did I say, oh, I don't want to take this because it gets me stoned. I wanted to take it because they told me it was going to get rid of the pain. And so it's kind of the same thing with the weed. It's going to be a new feeling, but set aside time, where you do know that you may get stoned. So you're not, responsible for children and dogs or anything else. And then sit with it and think about what it makes you feel, because I'm convinced that what it's doing is tapping into your brain. People say, oh, I get anxious, I get, paranoid. Well, look at what you're paranoid about. Are you paranoid that people are going to know, that you're like, what is it that's giving you the anxiety? Because I think that is what the plant does to you, is it offers you a path to seeing what's making you sick. And so rather than just taking it willy-nilly and hoping that it's going to subdue your, or suppress your symptom, if you take it with the conscious thought of, I am going to consume this and I'm going to sit, inside of myself and I'm going to visit with myself and see what's going on today, it looks a lot different.
Yeah, that sounds actually really, really interesting. And I kind of want to try it. Do you
and that's
every day, every morning you start off with this smoothie?
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And what happens if you skip?
I'm okay. It's just not as enjoyable a day. Like I haven't had it now. I mean, I can function. I could go outside and I could garden all day, but it's not like, oh, it's not enjoyable because I wasn't stoned. It's just, I don't tap into myself and do the check engine light all the time. I go back to my plow method, just plow through, just push, push, push. And I've obviously had to do that. There have been times and situations in the last 7 years where, actually not many, but a few that I haven't been able to consume, like when I'm flying and it's taking 17 hours and things like that. But, and back in the beginning, a day without it would have been misery.
Yeah.
And a day without it now is just me concerning that I'm not moving forward, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. It does.
I mean, a really good judge for me as far as like, am I really better? Last weekend, my son was in town and we drove down to the place south of here that's about 2 hours away to watch him in a powerlifting or strongman competition. And we were in the car. We went back and forth both days. And we were in the car for probably 8 to 10 hours over the course of 2 days. I was sitting in a folding chair in a tiny little, space for most of a day, didn't do any of my exercises. I did nothing as far as my protocol. And I looked at my husband on the way home on Sunday night and I realized I had not experienced pain once in the entire weekend. That's mind blowing. And he was looking at me and he was laughing because he's like, you look upset. And I was like, I feel empty, like I'm looking for it. I'm literally scanning my body because I'm like, come on, Megan, something's got to hurt. It's been that prevalent in my life for so long that I felt uncomfortable. I was like, what? Because everything I do is to distract from the pain. Like all of the hats that I crochet, all of the writing I do, everything I do is simply to distract from the pain. And when I didn't have the pain, I'm like, well, what the fuck do I do now? Like,
you just keep crocheting and keep
but it's not quite the same because I'm doing it for doing it rather than, as I said, a distraction. It's not anywhere I thought I would get when I started this. I thought it would just be another way to mask the pain.
Yeah.
And that, I was on methadone, I was on antiptyline, I was on Empira. I mean, I was on so many different medications. And I just assumed that this was just one more thing that was going to mask it. And maybe it was a little healthier than the things I was on.
What advice would you have for somebody who wants to get off medication?
So I did that on my own, and it took almost 18 months. And I did it extremely slow. I took each medication individually, and I would do, one less pill or one less dose for a week or two, and I would sit with it. And part of that was I was on gabapentin, and that I had been told was really, really difficult to come off, and that you could get withdrawals and everything. And so that's the one I started with. And so I went extremely, extremely slow. And then when that was successful and I didn't have any horrible, I mean, as I write in the book, it's like, I expected the levels to be just astronomical. I mean, I thought I would just be absolutely insane, and it was no different. And that was the shocking and disturbing thing to me, was looking at these, 12 pills I was taking daily, and the amount of chemicals and shit that was in them, thinking that they were helping, and finding out that they were doing nothing. I mean, that just was mind blowing.
And not only probably doing nothing, they were making you feel worse.
Yeah, no, I mean, and so I'm right now working on a podcast about the gabapentin, because that's the one you say, what advice would I give people? And I don't mean to be a negative Nancy or like an alarmist, but gabapentin is probably the worst thing that I was on out of everything that I took. And the reason is, and I was on it almost for the entire 10 years I was on pharmaceuticals. And here's the thing, from the very start, my brain, like my memory, started to go to shit. And it was highlighted in my life in that my ex used it constantly to try to manipulate me against the kids, and went to court and tried to get custody of the children using my lack of memory and mental function. So, I mean, it was a really big point of contention for me. And, my doctors just kept saying, it's the disease. I mean, I talked to anybody who has it. It really fucks up your memory and your brain. And I believe that. And then I came off of the gabapentin, and my memory and brain function began to improve, and it's continuing to improve. I still go into the fog and I have problems, but it is much more of a rare occasion now. And I now see it clearly that it was the gabapentin. And so I did research, and there are scientific studies that show gabapentin stops your brain's ability from forming new synapses. And that means making memories. So I was on a drug that made my brain unable to form new memories. And I was told it was the disease, and it wasn't. And that, to me, is the most, because it made me doubt myself in so many other ways, when your brain isn't working. And I had never really worried about the functionality of my brain. When I got this disease, I was like, I'm not going to be in a wheelchair. Like, it was all about the physical. I never thought about the brain until it began to go to mush. And I was like, holy shit, like, I'm a well-spoken, well-thought-out person. I don't want to be somebody who's like, blah, 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 like, I didn't want to be that person, but I was becoming that person. And I was told it was the disease, and it wasn't. It was the medication.
In my case, it was probably the disease, and not even the disease. I always blame the inflammation in my body.
Yes.
So I don't blame MS. I blame what I eat, what I do, what did I do before, MS is just there. I think it's just a diagnosis.
Yeah.
But I kind of wanted to ask you, because people are very concerned about having lesions on their spine and the way they walk, and that's wheelchair. How is your walk? How is your exercise routine? Share us more about that.
So, not hiking a lot these days, because my service dog is now 16 years old and crotchety as fuck, and doesn't like to walk anymore. But my physical ability is, okay, here's a good answer. From year 2, so I guess 1 year into getting diagnosed, I was given a cane and an arm crutch and told to use them. Was told by a physical therapist, only use them when you need them. And they became a part of my life. I walk here on our 5 acres. I do my hikes and my walks without it. But when I am out in public, because of the sensory overload and what it does to me, I have always used my cane and my crutch, and I have needed it. And for the last 5 weeks, I have gone without it to the grocery store, to like out in public, which is mind blowing to me, because again, I didn't think I would ever have the confidence to do that. I
mentioned confidence. So it's not your body ability of walking, but your mind kind of scared leaving it at home.
Yeah, so it's 100%. I think probably a year ago, my physical well-being, like I've done so much strength training. I work on my core and my leg muscles so that I counteract the vertigo and the balance issues. I think a year ago, I would have been fine without it. But there's 100%, it's my crutch. It is what tells the world there is something wrong with me. As I explained to my pelvic floor doctor, she's the one who got me to actually show up anywhere without it, because I came sassying in, just holding it in one hand. And she's like, what the fuck is the cane about? And I was like, and I explained, I was like, here's the thing. Before I used the crutch and cane all the time, I had some significant falls, like into a dairy department or container at a grocery store, like full on face down into the glass. 911 was called, and I was accused of drinking. I had another situation where I was at my kid's school for a concert, and I tripped up the stairs, and 10 parents put me in a room and surrounded me and accused me of drinking. And it was horrible because it's invisible and they didn't see it. The minute I got a crutch, the world became kinder to me. The minute I had something on the outside that said, hey, even though I look good, people were, so it is as much for the outside world in my mind and my protection from, I've had really shitty things happen. And again, if people understand that there is something that potentially is wrong, everyone is a little bit nicer. And I don't go out very much in the world these days. I'm very sequestered in our life. And when I do, people are seeming like they're not that nice these days in society. I think we all can agree there's a little bit of,
stress
things going on. And so that just made me double down that I didn't want to go without it. Because again, if the world can be a little kinder to me while I'm trying to navigate this, that seemed worth it. And so yeah, it really was partly me just feeling comfortable enough to leave it behind and strong enough that if something happens that I can stick up for myself and I can explain things without the need of. So I don't know if it'll stick. I can't. The real reason I started was I left it behind somewhere. And that was embarrassing to like walk back in and be like, hi, I lost my arm crutch. And they're just like, what?
That's too funny.
But again, it's a sign that my body is telling me that we're ready to take this next leap. Yeah. And I mean, I'm hesitant to say it. I had a family member when I was first diagnosed. I got out of the car and decided that I didn't need the cane that day. And my physical therapist had said, only use it when you need it. I mean, because, I was embarrassed about it because I was a physically fit mom who, used to run and stuff. And she's like, don't use it when you don't think you need it. Use it when you do. It's you're in control. And I got out of the car, decided I didn't need it, and started across the street. And this family member grabbed my arm and was like, where's your cane? And I was like, I don't need it. And I was told to walk with a limp so that people would know there was something wrong with me.
Oh, God.
And I didn't think about that until, I talk about, I go deep and I'm healing shit. And it's digging up all of that old stuff to try to, to heal. And when I remembered that, I was like, of course I'm dependent on it, because I was told that I needed to have it to tell the world there was something wrong with me. And I've held on to that for years and years, which is kind of fucked up if you think about it.
It is. I don't know. I'm trying to find the right words to.
Well, and I don't really talk about it because I don't like trashing my family or talking bad about anybody. And that's not the point of the story. It's just, words carry a lot of weight. And, I hadn't thought about those falls, the one into the dairy department and the 911, like those were huge. And partly because of the gabapentin and not forming new memories. I am so fortunate that I am a writer because, the book, those stories, like I was embarrassed about the book for years because it was about pharmaceuticals. And here I am coming off the pharmaceuticals. And why would I want to tout the book? And why would I want people to buy it? I now understand it is a beautifully written book that is a wonderful cautionary tale of because now people are looking at me and being like, holy crap, what are you doing? And I want to be like, you need to understand this is where I started. I mean, I believed and I dove in full-fledged trying to do it the route that everybody said. And the advantage that I have is I don't have the wavering mental thought of what if I had taken the disease modifying drugs? Like would it make the progression less. Like, you know, that feeling of maybe I made the right or the wrong decision. Like, I know 100% I made the wrong decision, and I went down that path full-fledged for a very long time. And so now I don't have any concern of like, oh no, there's a disease modifying drug that's coming out. Should I look at taking it? Like, no, I know for a fact. And that's something that most people with this disease, even if they say they naturally manage, in the back of their mind, if they've never been on the pharmaceuticals and they have the doctor saying this is a good idea, this is a good idea, it's still going to be, I call it a niggle in your mind. It's just something that, you know, kind of tickles you and is there, that you're thinking about, like, maybe I should have, maybe it would make me better. And I, as I said, I don't have that. I have 100% confidence that I'm on the right route, because I went the other one and it was horrible.
Yeah. This is the stories. This is why I created the book, because this is what I want to hear. And that's why we are having this conversation, because I want to hear that you are doing better versus you did last year. And that just gives me so much like positivity.
Yeah, as I said, I want to rewrite the chapter, not because I'm embarrassed. I think I did a good job, but I want to, you know, when I say I still have these, and, you know, I want to explain that my new thought process is, you know, I'm healing. And now I'm faced with, what does Meg without MS look like? You know, and I have reached out to a few other people that, whether they are cured or they're in remission, but have really erased MS from their life, you know, through symptom management and whatnot.
Meaning the MRI, the lesions on their brain?
Yeah, they've gone down. I don't know that I have found anybody who is completely clear of it, but they have, you know, they have healed specific lesions, and most of them choose to even physically move, but whether or not physically, as you said, it's like the death of a person of you. They completely let go of it. Like, one woman moved to a different state and she lived somewhere for 7 years without anyone at that new place knowing she had MS ever. And now she's kind of regretting that huge separation, because she's trying to get back into the community to help people. And people are like, who are you? You know, I mean, I get it. It's navigating between the two. And, you know, if I really heal this thing, am I going to want to hover around and talk to a whole bunch of other people that still have this disease? And I do, because I think 100% this journey was meant to be. Like, my not getting, you know, stoned, my enzyme deficiency, my learning to grow it, my trying every single consumption method. I mean, it has to be for a reason. And even the whole idea of learning that cannabis is more than just a symptom, you know, management thing, that you really can use it to heal. All of those things are invaluable. And I'm learning they're not prevalent out in the world. There aren't a lot of stories that talk about, you know, using cannabis to that extreme. And I'm 100% sure at this point, our world needs information like this. I mean, things are pretty fucked up.
I completely agree with you. Yes.
And you know, I am well aware that most people who listen to me, in the back of their mind, are thinking, that's great for her, but I'm not going to do weed. Like, I have children, I have a husband, you know, who doesn't like weed. And I get it. Everybody has their own things. But I'm just saying, if you can get over what we as a society, you know, have put on the plant as a negative thing, it's a beautiful form of medicating. And it really, really taps into, you know, you healing shit.
Yes. And now it's more available to buy and use without.
Yeah. And I mean, you know, again, it's daunting. I talk about, you know, I put off going to the dispensary for months and months, even though I was in agony, because I was convinced I was going to get stoned off my ass and our kids were going to make fun of me. I mean, that's what they do. I mean, that's what we do as a family. And so I was going to give them like the ultimate, you know, topic for them to make fun of me. And yet now, I mean, they're kind of eating their words, because here I am getting better.
Tell us about Camp Sunshine.
So Camp Sunshine is actually just the place where we live. It's a beautiful, beautiful setting. And long before we even owned it, when I first started using the weed, I had this dream of having a place where other people, because the thing that I learned is the biggest hurdle for people with using cannabis is judgment, worrying about what other people are going to say, worrying that they're going to panic, worrying about all of these different things. And consuming cannabis is incredibly situational, meaning if you are in the right setting, in the right place, it can give you magic, and it can also give you paranoia if you're hiding in the bathroom hoping that your husband doesn't come home and smell the weed. I mean, it's a totally different thing. And so I had this dream of creating a place where people who really just wanted to experience weed and see what it felt like, as I said, don't want to get high, and just sitting with it and realizing what your body is intending, it to do with the plant. And so when we bought this place, I wish I could take my camera outside. I mean, it's gorgeous. It's got a pond, and it really is the ideal setting for what I've dreamed of. And initially I had this idea that we were going to have weddings and private events that I would have here, and that would fund what I wanted to be an educational center. I would take the money that I made from the rich people in Seattle who wanted a wedding at a cannabis farm and use that to help, patients come here and visit me and learn. I very quickly learned that that is not going to work. We had a horrible situation with a wedding last year, taking advantage of us, like just not respecting our property. And I realized I don't want other people having events on my place. So, and I, even last year, didn't feel mentally and physically I was ready to manage events myself. I was an event manager early some other time in my life, so I know what it takes to manage an event, and I didn't A, feel up to it, and B, want to do it. And so what I envision this place to be has, kind of mutated as time has gone on. But I want to have classes and events here that allow people to come, consume the cannabis, learn how to grow it, learn how to cook with it, can ask questions, and, do whatever it is they need to do to become comfortable with the idea of cannabis as a medicine. And on top of that, I want to have, like, we've already had 3 or 4, what I call campers, people who come and live with us and immerse themselves into my life and just see what I do, because it's hard to explain to people what I do, because I just do it because my body feels like it needs it. And I know that I have invaluable words of wisdom based on these people's feedback. I mean, things like when I have dead, numb feet, I put my ankle weights on for a couple of hours, and that activates all the muscles. And so when I take them off, the dead, numb feet aren't there anymore. I mean, it's things that I've learned that are hacks that are, useful. And so ideally, we would have maybe 5 or 6 people scheduled throughout the year to come stay with us for a week, 2 weeks, a month, whatever, people can allow to just come and try the weed and try all of the things. So that's the goal.
It sounds incredible. Like,
yeah,
it sounds like a retreat, not a camp.
So it's a cannabis retreat and educational center is what I have titled it. Which is part of why I'm an eternal auto or shadow ban on Instagram. Apparently, I'm not supposed to have the word cannabis in my profile because they're anti-cannabis. But I'm not gonna, like, in a lot of influencers or people who talk about weed on social media, change the name. They, either write it like W33D, so it's not weed, or they call it something else, or they say gardening. And I refuse to do that, because I'm not hiding this. It's not illegal. And even if it was, this is my medicine. This is my, if I were taking, the shots that I used to give myself, I wasn't hiding that. I'm not going to hide this. And that's been my mentality since day one. And I think that really has helped me in this process, because I think a lot of people have to overcome the paranoia and the worry of judgment. And also most people who have used it prior to it being legal. And so they still have that kind of sense of illicitness, like I light up a bong next to a cop in a car. Like, I don't care if I'm not driving and I need to be medicated, I'm going to do it. And so be it. I mean, I have to say, in all the years and all the forms that I have medicated in all the places, God bless my husband. I mean, we'll pull up, and I know a scenario that anybody else, with a husband who doesn't consume, you pull up at a wedding and you're like, oh my God, I got to have another joint, like, the anxiety, and I need to medicate. There would be irritation. Like, do you really need to do that? My husband bought into this 100%. Like, he would pull off to the side without me even asking and be like, why don't you smoke before we get there? I mean, he got, and he saw how much it gave me relief. I mean, that was the thing. If I got stoned off my ass and was sitting in the passenger seat drooling, high as fuck, he probably wouldn't have been willing, to do this. But every single time I consume, I got better. I was able to move. I was able to interact, and I never had to tap out, like I used to with the pills and the alcohol. I mean, I'd get to the end of the day and I'd just be like, I can't do anymore. And with the weed, it's like, give me a little bit more and I can do more.
Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot.
How do you envision your future, your healing journey?
I'm going to keep, so I dream. I mean, I dreamed about this camp and it's existing. I mean, we had somebody from the Netherlands come, like that's significant, and so my next dream is I want to write book number 2. And the only reason it hasn't happened, I mean, there's notebooks and notebooks of and pages of notes. I just want to make sure I get it right. In that I want to know what the world wants to know. And I'm beginning to figure that out. And, I want to be able to tell my story like my first book. I'm very good at doing that, but I want to make sure I put in there the information, because I realize one of my deficits in my kids make fun of me. If you ever look at my Instagram, I have over 10,000 posts on Instagram. That's mind blowing. Like that's insane, but it's because I began to have vision and mental focus problems with the computer. And so I stopped blogging, and Instagram became my journal. And so for the last 7 years, that's where I have journaled my, my existence and my journey. And I get that it is not in any organized fashion, that anybody who's following me is like, what the fuck, Meg, what do you do? I mean, and I get that, but I wish that I was more distinct and organized, but that's not me. And so I know that this book is going to be an answer to a lot of people. So I want to make sure I get it right and that I don't leave things out. So I'm working on that. But my dream is, we also love to travel. We drive around all the time. We did a road trip from Washington to Martha's Vineyard a couple of years ago and said, we need a van. And so my dream is to get a van to have our summers here where we have people come visit. I've got 3 people coming already this summer. We'll see how many more we can fit in. Have people come, do small events, get to know the community, do classes. And then once we harvest in October, get on the road and just drive around and do book signings and meet people and tell my story. Because I really do think that it is, like as you said, stories like this that give people hope. And it almost feels arrogant. I am understanding that I am an inspiration, that it's not me, it's my story and what I've done. And that 100%, if 7 years ago you had told me I could meet someone like me and learn things, I would have been there in a heartbeat, because I didn't know that this could work. And I just want people to know.
You are a living proof. That's
yeah. Yeah.
No. People find you.
Oh, well, Instagram, PBH with MS. As I said, 10,000. Some poor lady just found me and she's dying to know the whole story. And so if you go to Instagram, you can't, you have to scroll back and back and back. And she's spending nights just scrolling through.
Well, send her this video and this.
Oh, I will. I mean, I send her everything I do. It's just like, and I'm happy. I know I called you and talked about pulling my story out, and I'm glad that I didn't. And I am aware of why I did it, which was I didn't feel I had ownership of it. And by reading it aloud on the podcast, it gave me the ability to own it and not just be like, I wrote a story in a book. And so that was very helpful for me. But it's also opened up opportunities. I have the opportunity to be on 6 different podcasts in the next 2 weeks, just based on, and I just put this out, and I'm not even really doing a very good job I don't do a good job of pimping things out. But it's an opportunity for me to begin to get my story out. So I want to thank you for that. I know I have been a pain in your ass, but I also know that each step of the way I was coming genuinely from my heart and trying to navigate the right way for me.
Yes. And that's the most important thing. Being selfish is not really selfish. It's self-care.
Well, it still feels selfish to me, but it's okay. I'm willing to. So there's my Instagram, which has a myriad of information, but it basically is just my life day to day. And it's crazy, and it doesn't, it's not distinct, and it, there's no organization to it. I would love to say I have a YouTube or something that has all of these informative videos, and I don't right now. Maybe I will someday. I wrote a book. I don't even know where it is. Yep. Wrote a book. Here it is. And as I said, I was embarrassed about it because it's about the pharmaceuticals, but it is really, really a good tale of the journey I was on. And then I have the chapter I wrote for you all, and we started a podcast, which right now is only available on Spotify. It's called Weeding Through Life. And it started out, the great news is my husband is a part of this. As I say in the introduction, I had talked about doing a podcast because I realized that I have so much to say that writing it all out is going to take forever. And as you can tell from this interview, I talk a lot. I have a lot of words. And so I had always thought, and I even paid for the name of, it was Weeding Through MS, and I paid for that for a number of years and never did anything with it. I have hundreds of recordings, but it was all very forced and awkward. And I apparently am somewhat of a perfectionist, which is funny because I don't think I'm perfect in any way, shape, or form, but it's just when I put things out in the world right now, I am very aware of what the stereotype of a stoner is and what people think of people that use weed, on a general basis. And I want to negate that. I want to be well-spoken, well thought out. I want people to respect what I have to say rather than laughing at me. So I'm very cautious about what I put out. And so I never did anything with the podcast. And finally, one day I asked my husband if he would be willing to do it. And it was mainly because I have done a number of interviews like this with other MSers where it has gone very, very well. And it's been a very informative session where I feel like finally I'm getting some of my words out, and then they never post it. And so I got very, very frustrated because I was, hopeful that I would have these that I could, put on my page and say, if you, just like you said, that woman who's asking, I can say, watch this. And I would wait and wait, and months would go by. And there were probably 6 or 7 different people who did interviews that I spent an hour or two, sharing my story, and then nothing came of it. And I was really sad because I felt like, my story wasn't good enough or whatever. And so after seeing my frustration with that, my husband agreed that he would do this podcast with me. And he's not really a talker. He's not an educator. I mean, this is not his role. Like, as he said, he's never read a book in his entire life, certainly not my book. But the minute I said he was on board, everybody thought it was a fantastic idea. And I get it. It's because he makes fun of me. And so he provides levity when I'm, talking about the more serious things. But it also, just seeing his unwavering support is really important for people to see. I mean, because that's the other message that I am really, really big on touting is, if you want to heal things, you need to clean up your act and stop bullshitting yourself. And if you are in an unhappy marriage or an unhappy situation, it's not going to work. That is part of what is causing your disease. And, rearranging your life, upending it, as you said, it's not selfish, but it's horrifying. I mean, I walked away from a 14-year marriage that I thought I would never, ever leave because we don't get divorced. I mean, that's not what we do. And yet I, even back then on the pharmaceuticals and in the fog that I was in, saw it for what it was, which was just detrimental to my health. And so finding the person that is as goofy and stupid as I am, but also willing to support me has been huge. So him joining in on the podcast has been a good thing, I think. So we've got that out.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing all this and being so honest and vulnerable and just being inspirational.